First contact. The crystalline spires of Outpost Zenith gleamed against the backdrop of twin purple suns, their surfaces refracting light in hypnotic patterns across the station's docking bay. Ambassador Sarah Chen stood at the viewport of her diplomatic vessel, her heart racing despite years of training. This wasn't just another first contact mission. This was humanity's chance to establish relations with the Valaxians, a species whose technological achievements were matched only by their infamous isolationism. Final approach clearance granted, Ambassador, announced the ship's eye. Valaxian Control notes that you are the first non-emergency landing they've permitted in 15 standard years. Sarah smoothed her formal attire, a blend of Earth diplomatic traditions and what little they knew of Valaxian customs. Any last-minute intelligence updates? Negative. Our knowledge of Valaxian society remains limited to long-range observations and the few emergency interactions recorded. Primary points of note remain unchanged. Strict matriarchal hierarchy, advanced biotechnology, and extreme territorial defensiveness. The ship glided into the docking bay with precision, settling onto the pristine landing pad. Sarah took a deep breath, centering herself. The next few moments would set the tone for humanity's relationship with one of the most powerful civilizations in this sector of space. The airlock cycled, and Sarah stepped out onto Valaxian territory. The atmosphere felt thick with tension as she observed her welcoming party, or perhaps more accurately, her inspection committee. 3 Valaxians stood before her, their iridescent scales shifting colors in complex patterns that their xenobiologists believed served as a form of nonverbal communication. The central figure, nearly 3 meters tall, bore elaborate biomechanical augmentations that pulsed with internal light. This must be First Speaker Vexalia, the highest-ranking Valaxian official willing to meet with an outsider. Her companions, though shorter, carried themselves with similar regal bearing. Ambassador Chen. Vexalia's translator device conveyed her words in crisp, standard English. Your presence here violates countless protocols and traditions. Explain why we should not simply send you back into the void. Sarah had expected this challenge. Rather than immediately responding, she performed the traditional Valaxian greeting gesture they'd pieced together from observation, a complex movement of hands and slight bow that acknowledged both authority and mutual respect. The scales along Vexalia's neck rippled with what Sarah hoped was approval. You have studied our ways. First Speaker, I come seeking neither resources nor territory. Humanity believes that diversity breeds strength and isolation breeds stagnation. We propose an exchange of knowledge and culture that could benefit both our peoples. Vexalia's bio-augments pulsed faster. Pretty words. Many species have offered pretty words before attempting to exploit us. Why should humans be different? Sarah reached slowly into her pocket, noting how the other Valaxians tensed. She withdrew a small holographic projector. With your permission, I would like to show you something. After a long moment, Vexalia nodded. Sarah activated the device, and a 3-dimensional image filled the space between them. Earth's Great Barrier Reef, teeming with life and color. This is one of our world's greatest treasures, Sarah explained. For centuries, we failed to protect it. Climate change and pollution nearly destroyed it entirely. But through dedication, innovation, and the willingness to learn from our mistakes, we restored it. Today it thrives once more. She paused, meeting Vexalia's gaze. We understand the importance of preserving what is precious, of protecting one's heritage while adapting to survive. The first speaker studied the hologram intently, her scales shifting through subtle hues. You chose this image deliberately. Yes, our research suggests Valaxian architecture mirrors the complex ecosystems of coral reefs. We believe there may be similar parallels in how our species think and adapt. A low harmonic tone emanated from Vexalia, the first time Sarah had heard their natural form of communication. The other Valaxians responded with their own harmonics, creating an intricate melody that made the air itself seem to vibrate. Interesting, Vexalia finally said through the translator. You demonstrate understanding rather than mere knowledge. Perhaps, she gestured to her companions. You will be escorted to temporary quarters. We will convene a council session to discuss your proposal. Thank you, first speaker. However, I have one request. Sarah kept her voice steady, knowing this moment could define everything. I asked to be assigned a cultural advisor, someone who can help me avoid unintentionally causing offense while I am here. In return, I offer to answer any questions about humanity they might have. The harmonics resumed, more intense this time. Sarah waited, her hands clasped formally in front of her. Finally, Vex'ahlia spoke again. Bold, very bold. You ask for unprecedented access to our society. Her scales shifted to a deep blue. Yet you frame it as protecting our customs rather than satisfying your curiosity. Clever. A pause. I will assign you an advisor, but know that any violation of our protocols will result in immediate expulsion. Understood and appreciated. First speaker. As Sarah followed her escorts deeper into the station, she allowed herself a small smile. It wasn't a resounding success, but it was a beginning. Humanity had its foot in the door. Now came the real challenge, proving they could be trusted with what lay beyond it. The temporary quarters they led her to were clearly designed for visiting dignitaries of various species, though the layer of dust suggested they hadn't seen use in quite some time. The room was a perfect blend of function and artistic beauty, with walls that seemed to ripple like water and furniture that grew organically from the floor. Sarah had just begun to unpack when a soft chime announced a visitor. The door dissolved into light, revealing a younger Valaxian whose scales bore simpler augmentations than the first speaker's. I am Nexi, she announced without preamble. I have been assigned as your advisor. The council will convene in 6 hours to discuss your proposal. Until then, I am to answer your questions and ensure you do not inadvertently commit any grave cultural offenses. Sarah recognized an opportunity when she saw one. Thank you, Nexi. Perhaps we could start with proper etiquette for council appearances. I want to ensure I show appropriate respect for such an important occasion. Nexi's scales flickered with what might have been surprise. You continue to impress with your consideration of our protocols. Very well. Let us begin with the proper way to enter the council chamber. As Sarah listened and learned, she couldn't help but feel optimistic. The Valaxian's reputation for isolationism was well earned, but she sensed an underlying curiosity in Nexi's detailed explanations. Perhaps this species wasn't as completely closed off as everyone believed. They just needed the right approach, one based on respect, understanding, and genuine desire to learn. In 6 hours, she would face the council, and thanks to this conversation, she would be better prepared to bridge the vast gulf between their civilizations. One small step at a time, she would show them that humanity could be more than just another potential threat to their way of life. They could be partners in building something greater than either civilization could achieve alone. Breaking barriers. The council chamber of Outpost Zenith defy human architectural concepts. Bioluminescent structures pulsed in rhythmic patterns, while the walls themselves seemed to breathe. Sarah Chen stood at the chamber's center, surrounded by 12 of the most powerful Valaxians in this sector of space. Their scales shifted through complex color patterns as they studied her in silence. Nexi had spent hours preparing her for this moment. Stand precisely here. Keep your hands visible but relaxed. Maintain eye contact with the speaker, but never stare. Most importantly, wait to be addressed before speaking. First speaker Vex'ahlia's voice cut through the silence. The human requests an unprecedented partnership. We have survived millennia through careful isolation. Why should we risk everything now? Sarah noticed how the speaker's scales rippled with subtle undertones of curiosity beneath the official sternness. Following Nexi's coaching, she waited 3 beats before responding. Respected council, I suggest that isolation is no longer sufficient protection. The galaxy grows smaller each cycle. New species achieve faster than light travel regularly. Information spreads at unprecedented rates. She gestured to the living walls around them. Your biotechnology is remarkable, but other civilizations are making advances in different directions. Sooner or later, isolation will become impossible to maintain. A low harmonic rippled through the chamber, the Valaxian equivalent of murmuring. One of the council members, their scales a deep crimson, leaned forward. You speak of inevitable contact as if it were fact. Yet we have maintained our borders successfully for generations. With respect, Counselor, you've maintained them against species who approach with obvious intent. But what of the subtle threats? The cultural contamination that comes through information networks, the economic pressures of changing trade routes. Sarah paused, carefully choosing her next words. Humanity doesn't seek to change who you are. We seek to help you preserve your identity while adapting to a changing galaxy. The harmonics intensified. Vexilia's augments pulsed rapidly. Bold words from a species that nearly destroyed itself twice before reaching the stars. Why should we trust human judgment? Because we learned from those mistakes. Sarah activated another holographic projection, this time showing Earth's restored rainforests. We nearly destroyed our planet's ecosystems. Instead, we developed technologies to restore them. We almost annihilated ourselves through warfare. Instead, we created systems of cooperation and mutual benefit. She swept her hand through the hologram. Every near disaster taught us the importance of balance, of preserving the past while embracing the future. A new voice spoke, younger, with scales shifting through shades of green. Yet you propose we abandon our traditions of isolation. No, Counselor. I propose we help you strengthen them. Sarah smiled slightly. Imagine sharing knowledge of your biotechnology while learning our methods of cultural preservation. Together, we could develop better ways to protect your society from unwanted influence while engaging safely with necessary contact. The chamber fell silent save for the subtle pulse of the living walls. Sarah maintained her formal posture, though her heart raced. She had laid out humanity's proposal. Now everything depended on how the council received it. Vexilia rose, her augments casting shifting patterns across the chamber. You speak well, Ambassador. Perhaps too well. Words are easy. Proof is harder. Then test us, Sarah replied instantly. Set up a controlled exchange program. Choose a specific project where we can demonstrate our commitment to respectful cooperation. If we fail to meet your standards, you lose nothing but time. The harmonics changed pitch, becoming almost musical. The council members' scales rippled in complex patterns as they communicated in ways Sarah couldn't fully grasp. Finally, Vexilia spoke again. A proposal. One of our research outposts has reported unusual readings from a nearby nebula. Investigate with them. Show us how humans collaborate while respecting boundaries. The mission parameters will be strictly controlled. Sarah bowed formally. We would be honored. When do we begin? Immediately. Nexi will continue as your liaison and observe your behavior. Vexilia's scales shifted to deep blue. Remember, Ambassador, one wrong move, one breach of trust, and this experiment ends. As Sarah left the chamber, Nexi fell into step beside her. That was unexpected, the young Valaxian admitted. No other species has ever suggested strengthening our isolation rather than breaking it down. Because they didn't understand what you were protecting, Sarah replied. They saw walls. We see a garden that needs both roots and room to grow. Nexi's scales flickered with what Sarah was beginning to recognize as thoughtfulness. The nebula mission will be dangerous. The readings suggest temporal anomalies. Then we'll face them together. Sarah smiled. After all, what better way to build trust than by solving problems as equals? As they walked toward the research bay, Sarah felt cautiously optimistic. The council hadn't exactly embraced humanity's proposal, but they'd opened a door. Now she just had to prove that humans could walk through it without trampling everything in their path. The real challenge was just beginning. But then, she reflected, the most important bridges were always built one careful step at a time. Bridge Builder. The research vessel, Harmonic Dawn, hung at the edge of the nebula, its bioorganic hull reflecting the swirling purples and blues of the cosmic phenomenon before them. Inside the ship's observation dome, Sarah Chen studied the holographic data displays with growing concern. The temporal readings were unlike anything she'd ever seen. "The anomalies are intensifying," announced lead researcher Kix Era, her scales shifting through worried patterns of orange and red. "Standard containment protocols are failing." Sarah glanced at the Valaxian research team. In the 2 weeks since leaving Outpost Zenith, she'd learned to read their scale patterns better. Right now, they were displaying clear signs of distress. And for good reason. The nebula was behaving impossibly. "Show me the baseline readings again," Sarah requested. Nexi, ever present as her liaison, relayed the command to the ship's living computer systems. A new set of holograms bloomed in the air. "The temporal distortions are creating pocket universes," Kixera explained. "Each one contains a different version of local spacetime. If they continue to multiply—" She left the sentence unfinished. Sarah understood the implications. "They'll start overlapping with normal space. The entire sector could become uninhabitable." "Worse," Nexi added, her scales pulsing with anxiety. "The nearest Valaxian colony is less than a light year away. If these anomalies spread—" Sarah studied the data more intensely. There was something familiar about the pattern, something that reminded her of— "Wait, these energy signatures, they're similar to the quantum fluctuations we discovered in the Horsehead Nebula last year." The Valaxian researchers turned to her, their scales flickering with interest. "Explain," Kixera demanded. "We found that certain types of nebula can develop quantum instabilities when exposed to specific radiation frequencies. It's like—" Sarah paused, searching for an analogy they would understand. "Like your living architecture. If the wrong harmonic frequency is introduced, it disrupts the entire system." Nexi's scales shifted to a thoughtful blue. "You believe something is resonating with the nebula's natural frequency?" "Yes, but on a quantum level." Sarah manipulated the holographic display, highlighting specific energy patterns. "Look here and here. These aren't random fluctuations. They're waves, like ripples in a pond, but ripples in spacetime itself." Kixera studied the patterns intently. "If you're correct, we would need to find the source of the disruption and counter it with an opposing frequency." "Exactly. But—" Sarah hesitated. "The only way to generate a strong enough counter-frequency would be to modify your ship's bioorganic systems to create a quantum harmonic pulse." The observation dome fell silent. What Sarah was suggesting would require the Valaxians to share intimate details of their biotechnology, something they had never done with any other species. Kixera's scales rippled with complex patterns as she communicated silently with her team. Finally, she turned to Nexi. "Contact the Council. We need authorization." The next hour was tense as they waited for a response. The temporal anomalies continued to grow, their effects becoming visible to the naked eye, as reality itself seemed to ripple and twist in the space before them. Finally, the Council's response came through. "Proceed with extreme caution. Share only what is necessary. The humans' actions will be judged." What followed was an intense collaboration unlike anything Sarah had experienced. The Valaxian researchers explained the basics of their bioorganic technology, while Sarah shared humanity's understanding of quantum harmonics. Together, they began modifying the ship's systems. "The trick," Sarah explained as they worked, "is to match the disruption's frequency exactly, but in opposite phase, like two waves canceling each other out. Like competing harmonics in our communication." Nexi realized, her scales brightening with understanding. Hours passed as they made the modifications. The temporal anomalies grew stronger, reality fracturing around them in ways that made Sarah's eyes hurt to look at. Finally, Kixera announced, "The modifications are complete, but there's a problem." "What is it?" "Someone needs to manually adjust the harmonic frequency from the auxiliary control node. The feedback could be intense." Sarah understood what wasn't being said. The auxiliary control node was biological in nature. Using it could have unpredictable effects on a non-Valaxian nervous system. "I'll do it," she volunteered without hesitation. "Ambassador," Nexi protested, "the risk is necessary." Sarah met each of their gazes. "You've trusted me with your technology. Now trust me to help protect your people." After a moment of harmonic discussion, they agreed. Sarah was led to the auxiliary control node, a chamber that seemed more organic than mechanical. Biomural interfaces extended from the walls like delicate tendrils. "Remember," Kix-Era instructed, "you must match the frequency exactly. Your mind will need to become part of the ship's harmonic network." Sarah nodded, taking a deep breath as the neural interfaces connected with her nervous system. The sensation was indescribable, like being everywhere and nowhere at once, feeling the ship as if it were an extension of her own body. Through this connection, she could sense the temporal anomalies more directly. They weren't just disruptions in space-time. They were discordant notes in the universe's grand symphony. Slowly, carefully, she began adjusting the ship's quantum harmonics, seeking the perfect counter-frequency. Pain lanced through her consciousness as the feedback intensified, but she maintained her focus, matched the frequency. Opposite phase, like waves canceling out. Reality itself seemed to hold its breath. Then, with a sensation like a vast chord resolving, the temporal anomalies began to collapse in on themselves. The nebula's natural harmony reasserted itself, the quantum disruptions fading like the last echoes of a storm. Sarah felt the neural interfaces disconnect, leaving her drained but triumphant. She turned to find the Valaxian researchers staring at her with their scales displaying colors she'd never seen before. "You did it," Nexi said softly. "You actually did it." "We did it," Sarah corrected, managing a tired smile. "Together." As the harmonic dawn set course back to Outpost Zenith, Sarah knew something fundamental had changed. The Valaxians had shared their technology with an outsider, and that outsider had proven worthy of their trust. It wasn't just the nebulous harmony that had been restored. A bridge had been built, one that might finally span the gulf between their civilizations. Understanding. The council chamber hummed with harmonic energy as Sarah Chen presented her report on the nebula incident. The living walls pulsed with patterns she now recognized as indicating intense interest, a far cry from the suspicious rhythms of her first appearance here. "The quantum harmonics technology we developed together has applications beyond crisis management," she explained, manipulating the holographic display. "By combining human theoretical models with Valaxian biotechnology, we could create early warning systems for similar anomalies." First speaker Vexalia's augments glowed with an intensity Sarah hadn't seen before. "You propose further collaboration, even after experiencing the dangers of our technology firsthand." "With respect, first speaker, what I experienced was not danger, it was communion." Sarah's voice carried the weight of conviction. "Your bioorganic systems don't just interface with users, they create genuine connection, understanding, unity." A complex harmony rippled through the chamber as the council members communicated among themselves. Sarah waited patiently, noting how Nexi's scales shifted with what seemed like pride. "You speak of our most sacred technology as if you truly comprehend its significance," one of the council members observed, their scales deep purple with wonder. "Because I felt it," Sarah replied simply. "When I joined with the ship's systems, I didn't just control them. I understood them, felt the harmony that underlies everything your civilization has built." She paused, choosing her next words carefully. "That's why your isolation made perfect sense to me. You're not just protecting territory or resources. You're protecting a way of being that few species could comprehend, let alone respect." Vexalia rose from her seat, her augments casting dancing patterns across the chamber. "Yet you did comprehend it, and rather than seek to exploit this understanding, you used it to help us." She turned to address the full council. "This human has done what no other outsider has managed. She has proven that connection is possible without contamination. Because that's what humanity does best, Sarah said, earning surprised looks from the council. We adapt. We learn. We find ways to bridge gaps without destroying what makes each side unique. She gestured to Nexi. Your liaison can confirm. In all our time working together, I never once suggested changing Valaxian ways. I only sought to understand them. Nexi stepped forward, her scales shimmering with formal patterns. It's true, honored council. The human approach has been one of preservation through adaptation, not change through force. A new harmony filled the chamber, one Sarah had never heard before. It resonated at a frequency that made her skin tingle and her heart race. After what seemed like an eternity, Vex'ahlia spoke again. The council has reached a decision. We propose the establishment of a permanent human Valaxian research institute, a place where our species can work together while maintaining appropriate cultural boundaries. Sarah's diplomatic training barely kept her surprise in check. That's a generous offer. It is a practical one, another council member corrected, scales flickering with amusement. The nebula incident proved that our isolation, while necessary, cannot be absolute. If we must interact with the galaxy, better to do so with a species that understands the importance of harmony. There will be strict protocols. Vex'ahlia continued. The institute will be located in neutral space. All technology sharing will be carefully regulated. Cultural exchange will be voluntary and monitored. And most importantly, Nexi added, her scales bright with excitement, it will be staffed by individuals like yourself, those who seek to understand rather than change. Sarah bowed formally. Humanity would be honored to accept this proposal. May I ask what inspired such trust? Vex'ahlia's augments pulsed softly. When you joined with our ship systems, you did something unprecedented. You didn't just interface with the technology. You achieved true harmony with it. Our systems recorded your neural patterns. Her scales shifted to a deep, reverent blue. They matched the frequencies of our own ancestral songs. The implication staggered Sarah. Without realizing it, she had resonated with the very essence of Valaxian culture. I had no idea. Precisely, another council member noted. You achieved harmony naturally, without conscious effort. It suggests our species, despite our differences, share a fundamental capacity for understanding. Which is why, Vex'ahlia concluded, we believe this partnership can succeed where others would fail. You don't seek to change us because you intuitively grasp why we are as we are. As the council began discussing specific details of the institute's establishment, Sarah felt a profound sense of accomplishment. She had come seeking to build bridges between civilizations. Instead, she had discovered that the foundations for those bridges already existed. They just needed someone to recognize them. Nexi touched her arm gently. You're displaying happiness patterns in your body language, she observed, very similar to our own. Sarah smiled. Another harmony we share without realizing it. Perhaps, Nexi's scales shimmered thoughtfully. That's the greatest discovery we've made. Not that we can work together, but that we already had the capacity to understand each other. We just needed someone brave enough to try. Looking at the council members as they planned for a future neither species had imagined possible mere weeks ago, Sarah couldn't help but agree. Sometimes the strongest bridges weren't built at all. They were simply discovered, waiting to be crossed by those with the wisdom to see them. New Horizons, 1 year later. The Harmony Institute hung in space like a living jewel, its bioorganic architecture seamlessly blending Valaxian and human design principles. Crystalline spires reminiscent of Earth's ancient cathedrals merged with pulsing organic structures that sang with Valaxian harmonics. It was, Sarah Chen reflected as she stood in the central observatory, a perfect physical manifestation of what they'd achieved. The latest quantum harmonic sensors have detected 3 new temporal anomalies in nearby sectors. Nexa reported, her scales shimmering with excitement. Thanks to our early warning system, containment teams were deployed before any damage occurred. Sarah nodded, studying the holographic map showing the protected regions, and the cultural exchange program. Exceeding expectations, Nexi's scales shifted to pleased patterns of blue and gold. The human researchers have shown remarkable aptitude for understanding our harmonics. Several have even begun producing their own basic patterns. And our scientists are still marveling at how your biotechnology responds to music, Sarah added. The Mozart experiments were particularly successful. They both turned as first speaker Vexalia entered the observatory, her augments glowing with formal patterns. In the year since the nebula incident, the Valaxian leader had become a strong advocate for controlled cooperation between their species. The Council has reviewed the first year's data, Vexalia announced without preamble. The results are impressive. Sarah waited patiently, having learned that Valaxian leaders often needed time to frame their thoughts in proper harmonics before continuing. We have contained 12 major temporal anomalies, Vexalia continued, developed new protective technologies, expanded our understanding of quantum harmonics, and her scales shifted to a deep, meaningful purple. Not a single instance of cultural contamination has been recorded, because we built our protocols on mutual respect, Sarah replied. Every human here understands that preservation of Valaxian culture is as important as scientific progress. Nexi's scales flickered with what Sarah now recognized as pride, and every Valaxian has learned that connection doesn't have to mean loss of identity. Vexalia moved to the observatory's window, gazing out at the space where human and Valaxian ships now moved in coordinated patterns. The Council has approved Phase 2 of the project. We will establish 2 more institutes in other sectors. Sarah's diplomatic training couldn't quite mask her surprise. That's far more than we hoped for. Hope, Vexalia's augments pulsed thoughtfully, has proven to be one of humanity's most contagious traits. You hoped we could work together without losing ourselves. You hoped understanding was possible across the gulf between our species. She turned back to Sarah. Those hopes became reality because you approached them with wisdom rather than mere optimism. A soft chime interrupted them. The Institute's daily harmony, a blend of human music and Valaxian resonance that filled the corridors each cycle. Sarah had helped compose it, combining Earth's classical traditions with the mathematical precision of Valaxian harmonics. Listen, Nexi said softly, how the frequencies support each other without overwhelming one another. Like our species, there is another reason for expanding the program, Vexalia admitted. Other civilizations have noticed our collaboration. They see how we've maintained our isolation while selectively engaging with humanity. They're beginning to understand that respect for boundaries can coexist with cooperation. Sarah understood the implications. You're setting a new standard for interspecies relations. We are setting it together, Vexalia corrected. Your approach to diplomacy has proven that isolation and interaction are not mutually exclusive, that it's possible to reach out without losing what makes us unique. As if to emphasize her point, a group of human and Valaxian researchers passed by the observatory, deep in discussion about some project. Their body language, human gestures, and Valaxian scale patterns had begun to mirror each other in subtle ways, even as their distinct cultural identities remained clear. We've created something unprecedented here, Sarah observed. Not just a bridge between civilizations, but a new way of thinking about connection itself. Nexi, who had grown from a cautious liaison to a trusted friend over the past year, touched Sarah's arm gently. You humans have a saying, the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. We're discovering that's true of civilizations as well as individuals. The Council has one more announcement, Vexalia said, her augments glowing with formal intensity. We are establishing a new position, Ambassador of Harmony, someone to oversee all 3 institutes and guide our continued cooperation. Her scales shifted to what Sarah now knew was their equivalent of a smile. We would like you to accept this role, Sarah Chen. For a moment, Sarah was speechless. Such a position would have been unthinkable a year ago. I would be honored. First speaker. Then let us begin the next phase of our journey together, Vexalia declared. There are more bridges to build, more harmonies to discover. As they stood together in the observatory, watching human and Valaxian ships dance their careful choreography against the backdrop of stars, Sarah felt a profound sense of possibility. They had proved that understanding across the vast gulfs of space and culture was possible. That strength could be found not in isolation or assimilation, but in the delicate balance between connection and preservation. Most importantly, they had shown that the greatest adventures in space weren't just about exploring new worlds. They were about discovering new ways for different worlds to exist together, each maintaining their unique song while contributing to a greater harmony. The future, Sarah realized, would be composed of such harmonies, and humanity, with its endless capacity for adaptation and understanding, would help conduct the symphony.